children today and grandkids today will find a better world than what we have at the moment. So just wanted to start that out. Another hero would be Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who wrote the Everglades River Pass. And she was one of the first to identify really the value of the Everglades. It was not just a place to drain the swamp, as Napoleon Bonaparte Broward would have liked to see totally done. There's value out there in our wetlands. And today we're finally recognizing that fact. In some fashions, a little bit too late, but it's never too late to keep moving forward. As we like to say, even with the planting of trees, the best time to plant a tree is 40 years ago. The second best time is today. I'd like to go ahead and share a couple of things here in the background. I'm going to allude from time to time to different backgrounds. This is another photo from another wonderful person, staunch environmentalist and voice for the Everglades and other natural places, Clyde Butcher. Amazing person. If anybody has a chance to meet with him and talk with him, it's a wonderful opportunity. He no longer takes people out behind his old shack there off of Tamiami Trail, but there are others that take you back, and you'll see some of the locations from which he took some of his famous photographs, including some places that had the ghost orchid that no longer exist out there. And as we allude for, we talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's something very positive going on right now in Miami and Dade County and Broward counties, because Fairchild Gardens has identified a project to try to rescue and reintroduce a lot of native orchids that were decimated and stolen out of our natural areas. And they have a project where they're growing these things. They're encouraging some school children to start being involved with that effort. And lately, even Broward County has joined in that effort. So this is an educational effort. They can be reintroduced. They're going to be placed where they're not so easily accessed, and hopefully in a lot of our public areas. So that's a positive note to start us out. Another thing I'd like to share is some words of wisdom from somebody that's been on our court recently, is none other than Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away recently. And a couple things that she had mentioned is that as we look later on, we're looking to see what we can do to make things better in terms of legislatively. But her opinion was talking about, and it's an interesting correlation to what our conversation is today. The law will not be affected by the weather of today, but rather the climate of the era. I thought that was a very good way to frame ourselves, because we need to be forward thinking, looking out 40, 50, 100 years down the road in terms of the impacts of what we're doing today. The other thing that she pointed out very wisely is that the real changes, enduring changes, happen one step at a time. And that's akin to a precept of Judaism, talking about if somebody is anxious to make a major difference, we encourage them to go little by little. Don't try to take a huge giant step where you could fall backwards. Just gradually keep going in that same direction, and you'll eventually get where you're going. And final thought from Ruth Bader Ginsburg: imagine the kind of world you want your daughter and granddaughters. So I think that kind of frames our thought process for today as we kind of go through here. Some of the background that we had over here with Max was actually a shot taken with the largest Clyde Butcher installation, what happens to be over at Long Key Nature Center over in West Broward, off Flamingo Road. And it's interesting to note that that actually is an island, not a tree island that submerges part of the time. This was a real island. Pine Island Road was named after that strip of islands. Just like we have a stretch of highlands that go through the center part of the state. And these were the ancient areas where the waters were, the beaches were actually along the center part of our state many, many years ago. So let's go back in time, and we're going to talk about Sequestra. By the way, that the earliest archaeological find in Broward County was a skeleton 2,000 years old of a Tequesta Indian. Here's the shot that was a recreation of what was going on at the mouth of Miami River. The Tequesta population actually in West Broward predates that Tequesta population there at the mouth of Miami River. But as you can see here, they were creating nets and keeping fish alive till they needed them. They weren't just decimating huge populations. They were very efficient. They didn't waste. If they took something, they used every part of it. And that's something that you see all along the way. Another thing we can take a look here is some of their habitation. That habitation site down at the mouth of the Miami River is called the Miami Circles, because there were a series of circles that were located there. And that was discovered as they were digging to work the foundation for a large structure that was going on there right by the Brickell Avenue Bridge. And everything stopped right away. Bob Carr and a number of others got involved there, taking a look at what was involved. And unfortunately, that did go ahead and get built. But what they did is they set aside one little section where you can look through and see the actual area where one of those circles had existed all those multiple of centuries ago. If you take a look at these structures, it's kind of interesting because these are those circular structures that show up in their mapping. And what he did was very interesting. He took a bunch of lights and popped them around the perimeter of these different circles. And then he went and flew up one of these photographic helicopters that was able to take a look down there and give you an image of what the actual site was like. It was amazing, very advanced for what we would have expected down here for that area. And you notice there's, just like the Seminoles, they build their chiquis that are elevated. Because sometimes the waters would come in and require you to be above that water line. But down there in the mouth of Miami River, they didn't have the sea rise that we're dealing with today. So the other type of structures were fine. And it's nice to know that, just like Max would like to allude, and through the conversation, I will allude to my friend Max Osceola and some of his wisdom, but he would talk to me about nature, environment. He said, if you're looking for the solutions, we should take a look at Mother Nature. Mother Nature has the answer. You want to take a look at what nature does by itself. Nature doesn't put up walls and structures and seawalls. You have natural growth. So the first thing I want us to think about is a living shoreline. That's the first take home that we can have today, because that's what we want to encourage. And even the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is now has that understanding. So wherever possible, as we're looking to shore up our, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, our shorelines and our areas bordering our structures, we want to look towards incorporating as much as possible that living shoreline, because that's something that's going to be durable. That's something that can be there long after we're gone, if it's done properly. Nature has done it right. Man can try the best we can to mimic what nature did perfectly. And one thing that's done already now in the Keys is they've taken that concept of elevating these structures, and all the Keys houses that we see down there are having that idea. So it could be a house that was already built that's elevated. It could be a structure that's newly built that's elevated. And it could also be something that where you have the ability to have that first floor and you build above it, knowing that at some point that first story may be sacrificial, it may be wiped out. So what they do is they just take and move all the infrastructure, the electrical, the plumbing, the other things like that, up above at a higher level. So if there is that impact that's sacrificial, it's no problem. And that's something that's not new. There's structures over just north of the entrance to Port Everglades, right near the Point of the Americas, where the condos are built there. The first places of apartments are actually start on the second story, and all the infrastructure is also elevated to that level. So it's nothing new. You just need to try to realize that that's something that's a good thing to do. We're going to be running from the seagrass to the sawgrass to try to give us a little structure there. So that in mind, we're going to think in terms of what we have offshore. And some of the good is we do have a lot of plants off the shore here in Broward County, but we also have a great set of coral reefs that run north to south. One of the good things that's going on right now is that we have Nova Southeastern University that's also up there near the Mizell Johnson State Park that has an effort going on to grow new corals to reinsert out there in the wild. Because unfortunately, what's happening right now is that we have coral bleaching. And even young folks that are out there, my neighbor who's 13, he's been out diving for a number of years. And he spoke actually in City Hall, talked about his experience diving. And over his young age, he's gone down with his dad. They love to fish, go outdoors, hike up in the woods. And he used to see all these live corals, and they used to see all these fish all over the place. But now they go down and see a lack of fish and also this bleaching going on. So it's very troublesome. Reason for that is many different things. But before we go into the sources, I wanted to share that as we're growing these corals at Nova Southeastern Oceanographic, even though they're located there, Mizell Johnson State Park, very close to the ocean, they're not using ocean water. And they're not taking water out from the intracoastal. They're actually pulling water up from underground, modifying it, and creating a proper seawater in which these things can grow properly, and then take them back out and install them. So far, the success rate is in the 90 percentile, but that's very hopeful, except there's certain species that grow faster than others, and pretty much all of them grow pretty slowly. So that's an opportunity. There's another thing going on out there off our shores that is not so wonderful. And I think in one of the promos for this lecture today that was looked at, and that's our ocean outfall. The ocean outfall is something that's, whether we want to realize this or not, across the state of Florida, over 1 billion gallons every day is being pumped offshore from treated sewage. So it's not pure water. It's not the initial effluent that we flush down, but it's not wonderful stuff. And if possible, we want to change that. So here's a little bit image for those that may have dove down in that area. Not a wonderful sight. You see the fish seem to like that, but there's nutrients there. And I don't know that we're all encouraged or desiring to start eating a bunch of these fish. What's proposed right now is actually a deep well injection. The deep well injection was required by the state of Florida to happen by 2020. What that means is instead of being able to pump these billions of gallons offshore, they need to be pumped deep underground into the boulder zone. And there's many that say, oh, the boulder zone is fine, that's way down deep, it's not going to impact anything. Out of sight, out of mind. I don't like that idea. Right now, we're going to be forced to do that with our Hollywood effluent, but I'm hoping over time we may be able to find a different solution. In talking to management there, I know this was required to happen to keep us within our time frame, but if other opportunities evolve, I'm hoping that we can take advantage of those, and that may take some additional infrastructure that we put into place now to allow that effluent to go in a different direction. As an example, about 3 years ago, I was chair of the Green Team for the City of Hollywood Advisory Committee to the City Commission. And we arranged to take the entire City Commission plus staff up to Wacotahachie Wetlands up in Palm Beach County. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to get there, but it's a wonderful place. People come from around the world to come there to see the bird life. They're nesting. Last year, there were over 900,000 visitors to that site. It's a man-made wetlands. And what they do is they take secondary treated wastewater and gradually release it out to different areas across the that open space that was created. And just naturally, birds and other wildlife have come to nest there, to breed there, to stay there. And those that are migrating, they migrate and come back the next year. And it's interesting if you go in a sequence of time, starting in, say, January and go through March. So you see the arrival of some of these species, bird species. You'll see them start mating, making their nest, laying eggs, full hatchlings come out, eating their young. So you'll see that entire cycle. And one thing that you may want to take a note if you go there is to look in each one of these trees. Sometimes you can get within 10 or 15 feet from the pineapples, where there's a very popular place for them to be nesting. And you'll see up to 10 or 15 different species nesting together in that same tree. What was pointed out to me that I might not have recognized on my own is that in each one of these trees, all this variety of birds are building their nests at the same time. They're laying their eggs at the same time. Eggs more or less start hatching out at the same time. They're feeding their young at the same time, and they're fledging and flying off at about the same time. And an adjacent tree may have the same species, but they may be at a different point in that cycle. So that's pretty wonderful. I'll get to another screen. I don't want to draw us too much. This is a little sight back into the wilderness. So here's a little question I want to throw out to everybody, because maybe we'll learn another item. We talk about marshes, we talk about wetlands in general, we talk about swamps. Does anybody here know the difference between a swamp and a marsh? I don't know if anybody has the answer, but you'll know yourself if you got the right answer. The difference between a swamp and a marsh is a swamp has trees like what we're looking at here. The marsh does not have the trees. So another little tidbit you can share with somebody that may not know that. Getting back to the Seminoles, they were very wonderful people, leading by example. And my own family, as I said, I'm going to try to share a few stories today. My family goes back to the early part of the century. And we actually had our family traditions talk about living downtown Miami when there were no paved roads back then. And they'd see the Seminoles coming up the Miami River in their dugouts to trade. So that's pretty incredible. And I started thinking back to places like we talked about earlier, places that I got to enjoy as a young kid with my twin brother, Gary. We go as a family before my sister, Ivy, was born 7 years later. But one of my favorite places to go was actually Tahiti Beach. And I thought that was great. What a memory. We were twins. We were part of the Twins Club, Mothers of Twins Club as it was. And actually what they would do is they get together. And I remember very fondly going as representatives of the Twins Club to go greet a set of quadruplets that were coming into town. And they were going to be coming into the airport, the old airport. Some of you that live down here may remember that. And we're going to go meet the quadruplets and go out on a picnic to go out to Tahiti Beach. And when we got out there, it was, let's see if I can get the right site here. This is my Tahiti Beach, I'm sorry. That's what Tahiti Beach looks like today. That's the aerial view of Tahiti Beach. But back when I was there as a kid, it was just a bunch of palm trees and wide open beach. I don't know why I can't seem to find the right slide on that, but unfortunately that's not there. But one thing that it was not a natural area. All these years I thought how wonderful it was to go down there to Tahiti Beach and spend some time there at these lagoons that were created. But what it was is actually all this area was covered with mangroves. And it was a created area that was created by the uh, city of Coral Gables to offer a place for recreation for the residents. So that's what it was. They decimated all the mangroves, turned that into an open space, and then allowed people. I think you have no. That's not a video. So we were able to enjoy that as kids. It looked a little similar to this. So what happened? 1926 came. A hurricane came. Tahiti Beach got wiped out. And oh, by the way, we talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Many of us like the way these coconut palms look. But coconut palms are actually an invasive species, exotic invasive species. So not something we really want to be encouraging so much, even though they're beautiful and you enjoy them. Just make sure that those coconuts don't start spreading around and start increasing their population all over the area. So that's a little bit of story of Tahiti Beach. But the other thing about Tahiti Beach, just like Crandon Park Beach, where we got to go as kids, is that the Native Americans and the black population, the people who lived in Overtown, were not allowed to go there. There was Virginia Key Beach in Miami, and in our neck of the woods here in Broward County was Mizell Johnson. That was the first black beach here in Broward County. And the way that came about is actually there were some people that went bathing, swimming at the beach in Fort Lauderdale where they weren't allowed, got arrested. Fast forward, because of a lot of different efforts for a lot of different people, John Lloyd Park was created, now Mizell Johnson. Mizell and Johnson were, I believe, the two that waited in and got arrested. And John Lloyd was, I believe, the city or county attorney that helped put together that list of properties to make that happen. As we talked earlier about wonderful things, not so wonderful things, there's something else that you may want to be seeing here in our wonderful Mizell Johnson. And that's unfortunately because of the lack of beach or sand that's migrating southwards, we have major cliffing problems. So the, oh, here's, that's not that stuff there. Sorry. Having a little technical difficulty with my slides here. But what there is there's major cliffing at John Lloyd Park, Mizell Johnson State Park. And what we have, there's warning signs as people are coming up from the land to start walking out towards the beach, that there's these cliffs, drop-offs of up to 10 feet that are very dangerous. This is because there's been major erosion, even with some of the plants that have been there in place. And a wonderful thing to note is that the small plants that you see quite often that sway in the breeze, just like waves of grain, are actually sea oats. And even though those plants may only be 3 or 4 feet tall, the root structures can go down up to 30 feet. Another personal observation, years ago I used to live up in Fort Lauderdale, and I used to go with my golden retriever down to the beach there, just south of the Yankee Clipper. And there was a bungalow colony there built in the 40s. And eventually that was the site of the Marriott Harbor Beach. So I was still going there, enjoying the beach and visiting as this was under construction. The old buildings were torn down. They started digging for the foundation. And as they kept digging and digging deeper and deeper, I knew that the only thing that was growing above that area was sea oats. And they get going deeper and deeper and deeper, and picture 3 stories deep with these roots that were allowed to grow for all those years. It was incredible. I had no clue. And I think just as a realistic way of thinking, if we have sand or soil that has roots holding it together versus just having the sand or soil, which one is going to weather better, pun intended, if we have heavy storms or surges coming our way, or wind? Just like if you took your hose on a pile of sand or a pile of dirt, that's going to wash out pretty readily. But if you have the same pile of sand that has vegetation growing into it, it takes a lot longer till the effects of that wind or water would wash that away. And all these are going to lead to some efforts that we can do later on to make things better. Regarding the dunes, the city of Hollywood is actually has the designation as Florida Green Local Government, which is a wonderful thing. I am president of the Florida Green Building Coalition, and we have standards for all the built structure as well as local governments. That's for the cities and the counties as far as what they need to do to lower their impact, and also best practices on the way they go about their fleets. So we encourage things like electric vehicle charging stations, try to go with more efficient vehicles, go with smaller vehicles when they can do, instead of going to a larger vehicle that's more gas hungry. So all these things come into play, as well as the built environment. We have standards towards more affordable housing. And there again, here's another little bit of learning for labels. Affordable housing is a knee-jerk terminology that's often used, but often affordable is not affordable. Builders or developers also often think about affordable housing being something between $300,000 and $500,000. People that are on Social Security or retirement incomes or fixed incomes know that that's not reality. When you have a single room apartment renting for about $1,500, that really probably should not be considered as affordable. So there's other terms. Attainable might be a really good one. Workforce is another good one. But all these things should be done in a way that the average person, or where the need exists, they can find a way to get housing where they can live. They don't need to be in a 10,000 square foot mansion. They can be in a 400 square foot facility and be just fine. Matter of fact, the other thing we like to encourage is mixed income housing, where somebody that's very well off may have the penthouse with 5,000 or 10,000 square feet, and somebody could be a single mom with a couple of kids living in that 400 square foot apartment in the same structure. They get to know one another. They get to learn from one another, because there's a sensitivity that's missed if somebody's always been around a like set of people, whether it's by race, whether it's by creed, whether it's religion, whether it's a matter of income level, whatever it might be. The more you can engage with other parts of the community, the more rounded you are, and the more accepting you are of a need that may exist that otherwise you may not want to address. So there's a lot of opportunities there. So one thing that's coming up later this week on Wednesday is there's a dune master plan that was put together by a dune task force that sunset a year ago, September. I actually was vice chair of that. Lee Gottlieb, that many of you know, he was the chair of that, and great job putting together recommendations for the city. We worked together with city staff, recognizing one thing, that along with putting in dunes, we need to have a plan for how they're maintained. So Lee recently introduced an Adopt a Dune plan that allows people to actually adopt a specific dune. First priority is going to be for those maybe living adjacent to that. But personally, I don't live adjacent to the beach, but I think anybody anywhere in the city of Hollywood should be allowed to go ahead and adopt that dune with your group, plant the plants that need to be in there, help maintain it over time. And if we take a look at maintenance, as long as we're doing things on an ongoing basis, it's not such a huge undertaking. It's something that can happen, and then we can relax in that hammock when you're done. So we talked about the beaches. We talked about, want to talk about plants, want to talk animals, and we'll talk a little bit more about structures. And by the way, before we get further into the plants and animals, there's a number of things we need for a healthy environment. And what we studied and learned as kids is food, clothing, shelter is what we need, but there's other things. There's other things that are actually even more of a priority. Water comes as a more priority. Anybody who may have taken a long hike on the Appalachian Trail or other trails, or going into the desert, or taking a hike out in the mountains, you realize that your water supply is crucial, and clean water is crucial. So water, but even more critical than water is air. We need to have our clean air to breathe. Now, right now, that's being recognized more and more. And along with buildings, as people are putting up larger structures, they're starting to understand there's a value to be placed on clean air, clean water, proper lighting. Biophilia, there's another great word. That's kind of a way that we're looking to mimic nature. So what they're doing is taking a look at their lighting. Everything can be scheduled. And so in the middle of the day, that bright sunlight that we have, just like our trees and plants and hopefully some of our vegetable gardens enjoy that intense light. But early part of the day and the end of the day, that light is not that bright. So their lighting inside their homes mimics that natural lighting. And we can take a look at how that would affect us here in Hollywood and South Florida. We've just put in lighting, a new lighting for LEDs in a lot of our streets, which is wonderful. They're more efficient. But the light color temperature that was chosen was 4,000 degrees Kelvin. What that translates to is a very white light. And that may be okay for our thoroughfares, but what we may want to be looking towards if we're going to relight the areas that are going into our neighborhoods, we may consider something that's more in tune with the light coloration that would happen naturally at nighttime for what we choose to put in our neighborhoods. Just a personal suggestion. So as far as food goes, we saw how the Native Americans were gathering their food and not being wasteful. We should be that same way. And there's a program that was introduced to one of the schools here in Broward County that's been picked up, and it's a food rescue. And the concept was if you have some whole food, it could be an apple, orange, something whole that could be left that you're not using, you could leave that. Something else could be there to take. And then all those things could be gathered to bring over to a food bank to offer to those in need. Another idea on the food side of things is a food forest. As we're planting these trees, it's a great thing to do, like they're doing in Coconut Creek. As they're working these greenways, they're planting new vegetation. And what they're choosing to plant there, along with a lot of native vegetation, are some food producing trees. As people would wander through there, when they're producing, they can take that back home to share or bring that back to share with others. So that's a terrific thing. Another thing that's
there was a question from Marcos. Can you take a question now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So Marcos, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, how's everybody doing today?
Hey, Mark.
My name is Marcos Peña. I'm from Hallandale Beach. I'm a local activist, local environmentalist. He brought up a lot of issues. And before he moved on, I just wanted to see if we get a little clarification. You talked about doing like a sand replenishment and then putting sand dunes on the beach. And then you talked about coral reefs protecting us. Well, one of the issues I think we have here is when we put that sand on the beach, it washes off and it kills the nearshore coral reefs. And this is just a fact. And if we continue to do that, we won't have any coral reefs left. As far as elevating houses, that's a great idea. We won't drown, but we will die of disease well before we have to worry about drowning. And far as like shoreline protection, we can't go from Jacksonville to the Keys and build a big 10 or 12-foot berm. It would make the beach inaccessible to people. So we have to come up with real solutions. The real solution, and it's hard for people, but we have to stop using carbon now. We have to stop using fossil fuels. It's really a difficult issue. I just signed papers on Friday. You're talking about solutions and the good part. We just started a nonprofit. I signed the papers on Friday. We're actually building boats that we're going to put in the water. These are all electric, solar-powered boats. The initial ones are pretty low-powered. We're going to do about 1,000 gallons of water an hour. We're going to clean the water, filter it like you would in the filter plant. We're going to use UVC to get rid of the nasty organisms so we don't kill people with Fiske, that kind of thing that's growing in the canals. We're going to re-oxygenate the canals, and we're going to put drones down to help clean the bottom and redo the structure with corals and native plants on the bottom. I think we need to come up with real solutions, and we need to do it real fast. I mean, if we look at the global warming situation, we've already melted enough water in the poles that in 8 years, we're going to have some pretty serious problems here. And I don't think we're going to address them by pumping water into the aquifer or by simply building sand dunes. I think we got to come up with some better solutions. But in the meantime, the water is getting so hot, it's not retaining oxygen, and that's why the fish are dying. My goal is to cool the water down in the canals, to re-oxygenate the canals, and to get them into a space where the fish can live in. Again, my name is Marcos Peña. The company, the actual nonprofit that we started is Green Planet Waterways Restorations, and I wanted to bring it up because one of the members of the Hollywood Historic Society is a member on my board, and we're going to do some good things for Hollywood. And we look forward to working with you guys and your support. And I thank you for your history lesson. I too am a local, and I learned several things today that I didn't know. But the main thing is we need to restore the waterways back the way they were. We can't just say it's okay now and move forward. As far as the beach goes, you have buildings all along the beach. We could take Hallandale, for example. We used to have a nice tree line, nice sloping beach. We never had any sand replenishment necessary. They built, I believe it's Beach Club there, that built 3 big buildings. Since then, we've had to replenish the beach. There's a big divot into the water, and there are no more natural trees. So we really need to come up with solutions, and I'm looking forward to the end of your talk, because I know you're going to come up with some good stuff. But I just wanted to stop there because I think we need to say that, look, we're not going to be able to elevate homes. That's not statistically going to work for the population. That'll work for a couple people. Statistically, we can't raise dunes. That'll work for a small portion, but it won't work for Florida. So we need to come up with better solutions. My name is Marcos Peña. Anything I can do to help, please let me know. That's all I have.
Marcos, that's great. I'm glad you brought up some of these things. And, you know, this is a perfect segue, because as we talked about before, you know, the corals are in peril from a lot of different reasons. And you're right, you know, it's disgusting to me that we put on sand, we pump it in, we drag it in from the center part of the state. You know, there's people that even want to go offshore and steal somebody else's beach off their island to bring over here for us to enjoy forever temporary pleasure that we have. That's ridiculous. I'm sure that Mother Nature and the Native American culture would not approve of such actions. As far as what you're talking about, going to elevate and stuff like that, one thing that I want to announce, and this seems to be a good time to do it, is that just announced at this past week at our annual climate summit, where 4 counties get together, Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and Monroe. There was an announcement of a study. It was called the Business Case for Resilience. And essentially what it shows is that if you're investing today $1 towards fixing the infrastructure and make it more resilient, the return on investment is double. For the built environment, and that does include things such as elevating structures, the return on that investment is close to 4 times the investment. So there is potential there. Marcos, and I'd be happy to talk to you. It's not a solution for everybody, as you pointed out. The other thing that we need to realize is there's going to be certain places where it needs to be planned retreat. There's certain places that are going to experience repetitive losses that can no longer be justified to try to keep those online. And the first time I saw that presented in a large fashion was actually by Monroe County at last year's conference that took place down in Key West. And they showed what was going to be happening over time as the sea rises, and different parts of the Keys are going to need to be abandoned. They're no longer going to be elevating the roadways. They're no longer be elevating structures. Those people, if they choose to live out there, they'll be commuting by boat or what have you, but it's unattainable to have enough of the funds and the wherewithal to support every single structure that's out there. So they're very limited in terms of what they're allowed to be built, and they do encourage things to be built to higher standards. One of the standards that they look towards is actually our Florida Green Building Coalition standards. And by the way, the state of Florida accepts only 4 third-party green certifications for their own buildings and universities. And that's Florida Green Building Coalitions, Florida Green, That's US Green Buildings, that's LEED, Green Globes, and GBS. So with that being said, I encourage everybody, if you are looking to support a policy that has to do with the built structure, take a look at these standards that are out there and try to make sure we're going beyond those standards. Because people need to realize that right now, there's people that celebrate, oh, this is the South Florida Building Code. Well, no, the building code is the minimum you are allowed to build to that standard. It's not something to strive for, that's the minimum allowable. And we need to start going way beyond this in a lot of different ways. And one of the things, this is a great segue from your comment, Marcos, is that we've been looking to try to incentivize things that can allow us to be more forward thinking. And if we could predict the future, as we really can to some degree, let's take a look at the standards that we're going to want to have as part of our standards 30, 50, even 100 years down the road. If we can encourage those things to be built that way today, they're going to be around and viable all those years in the future. We haven't knocked things down, built up, knocked things down, built up. We're a lot more efficient with the use of our energy, the use of our materials, and the use of our resources in general. But I appreciate your comment there, Mark. That's great. And thanks for allowing me to share that earlier than I was going to into the conversation. But do we have any other comments from somebody that they'd like to share at this point too? Okay. So, okay. Yeah, so at this point, I think it'd be good to try to start getting into some action items. You know, we talked about different types of pollution. Some of the things that people don't recognize that they should, I'll make a little pitch here, is that sign pollution is another type of pollution. You go to the beach and you see 100 different signs and you're walking through a natural area, it's no longer such a natural area. So there's signage available now that allows you a little bit of information where you need it. There's a QR code they can take you electronically to a plethora of additional information, and there's better ways to do that. Light pollution is another big one. We kind of alluded a little bit to that in terms of the color temperature. There's dark sky international standards that should be encouraged with all lighting that's going on. That's going to be to the exterior of your home. There's lighting requirements during turtle season that should help us recognize the importance of the way we light our areas. And just because you put in brighter and more light does not make you safer. Proper lighting of the proper area. Just think of a bright, shining light that's coming into your eyeballs. You can't see what's going on. That's bright light, but it doesn't make you safe. So that's a little side comment there. So let's take a look at some of the things that we can be doing. And let's go to a little bit more favorable photograph to think about. As we look at our action items, let's think in terms of what we can do. Number one, we can definitely vote. There's our good, the bad, and the ugly. So we definitely want to be out there and vote. I'm sure many people on this call today will include environmentally sensitive choices and experience of the people that we're looking to elect into positions as part of their qualifications for office. Maybe not the only qualification, but I think that's a good thing to strive for. Things that we can do, the adaptive doing we talked about. Plant trees. I encourage people to plant native trees where possible and shade trees. Yeah, it's great to put up these palm trees, and that's nice. But you know, really, the amount of shade that one single palm tree delivers versus one single shade tree is a huge difference. The thing we need to do is choose wisely, because when you plant the tree, you want to think what that's going to be like at maturity and what expenses, if any, there may be in maintaining it. So you want to make sure that the roots are not going to undermine your structure or undermine the sidewalks. You want to make sure that the amount of money it's going to take to maintain it is not going to be out of reach for you. Or maybe there's a communal group that gets together to plant some trees on some public areas and choose to support that maintenance over time to make sure that's a healthy tree into maturity. Another thing there regarding trees, to take a tree and move a 30-foot tree from point A to point B does not gain us any kind of tree canopy. It's actually a net loss because there's a chance that's not going to survive, and then it needs to be replaced. Better to plant a plethora of smaller trees, and even if you lose 50% of them, you're still way ahead of the game over time. Light color roofs that reflect the sunlight to cut down on your amount of electricity you need, amount of energy. Solar is the big area that gets a lot of attention these days, but if you're putting money into solar, it's usually a larger investment. Oftentimes you can put in lesser money and get the same amount of gain by just sealing your envelope. So you don't have leaky windows and doors to allow your air conditioning to go outside or the moist hot air coming inside. And you want to make sure you're insulating. And if you have a lighter color roof that reflects that sunlight, less heat. If you have trees alongside the house on the east and west side, more shade, less energy needed to maintain it. And also if you have windows where you can have the sunlight filtering in to avoid the need for turning on your electric lights during the course of the day, better yet. Solar plus storage is a way to go for the future perhaps, but we need to think in terms of what kind of storage we're going to be having. Community gardens is a wonderful thing to do. And there's a group that was doing a project up in Chicago where they're looking for property that could be available for a period of 2 years, 2 growing cycles, or even if it's concrete or asphalt, you could set up temporary facilities to allow people to come plant their crop, kind of a new way of doing the victory gardens of days of old. And it's been very successful up there. I know we have a newer community garden here off 56th Avenue over near the fire training station. I encourage everybody to try to plant some of their own vegetables and share with others. Buy local is another great thing to do. And you want to donate your excess produce. So I have another little audio closeout that I'd like to share with you. And oh, before I do that, there's a sighting that I'd like to share with you too. Over at CY Park recently, we didn't get to talk a lot about our animals, but invasive species are a major problem in terms of vegetation as well as animals. We have lionfish, we have other things that are impacting the corals. So there's things that we need to do to address that. But on the positive note, CY Park recently sighting a pair of pileated woodpeckers. Unbelievable, they're still there. I saw them myself 2 weeks ago on Wednesday. I continually talk to people, they've seen them. They've been over near the gazebo area, they've been over near the tennis courts and other areas, so keep an eye out. And what you may want to listen for is an interesting sound that sounds like this. That's not to be confused with the other famous woodpecker that everybody knows. So with that, I just want to close out with a final little tune here that kind of gives us a sense that what we need to be taking action and the time to start is today.
Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the flowers?
Everyone, you can unmute and sing along.
Oh, when will they ever
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. And I want to sign off with the seminal word. We were talking food earlier as well. And there's two other things I wanted to share from the Seminoles. One is they have different words for a lot of different things. And my wife and I, we don't eat any, animals. We're vegetarian. So in talking to Max, he said, I couldn't pronounce the Seminole word for vegetarian or plant-based person, but it translates to bad hunter. So I thought that I'd share that with you all too. And the final thing from the Seminoles, as you leave over there at the Hard Rock, Shona Beach. Thank you all very much.
Thank you,
So,
Barry.
Thank you very much, Barry.
do we have any comments that people want to share some of their own personal experience, like
Well,
Martha
thank
did?
you.
Barry, it's not really, well, whatever. I've noticed in the last week, I've been seeing these ospreys in our neighborhood, like in Hollywood Hills area.
Yeah.
Where are they coming from? Like, I've never seen ospreys in a residential neighborhood like this.
Well, they're looking for food. So yeah, they're great hunters. They're great fishermen. And actually, since we're sharing stories, one of my favorite stories is seeing an osprey while I was out canoeing with my dog, my golden retriever, down off the shore from Flamingo down in Everglades National Park. And I see this osprey come down, swoop down, grab a fish and start flying off with it. I said, wow, this is wonderful. And then I see another bird coming out to chase it down, and it's a bald eagle. And the bald eagle chased it till the osprey finally dropped its fish. And the eagle took advantage of the catch. So very opportunistic are American bald eagles. But yeah, they're definitely, there's populations here in Hollywood, and there's also populations, and there's a nesting site for the bald eagle, actually in West Broward, where there's cameras that you can go look and see the annual migration and nesting that goes on.
Where's that? Where in West Broward? Do you know?
It's a location that they don't really want to popularize a whole lot. It's in West Broward County. I'm sure you can Google and find it. Somewhere out in Pembroke Pines.
Okay.
I have a comment.
Yeah, Clive, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Barry. What a wonderful presentation on a beautiful day to hear about our environment.
Hero of mine, Clive. Thank you.
In the beginning, you got me thinking when you said, are there any spaces that have improved over the years and not gone back the other way? And I kept thinking, and I came up with several. Mid-Sal Johnson Park, one of them. I remember as a kid driving into the park, and you literally went through a tunnel of Australian pine trees. The whole entire road, and I gotta say, it was gorgeous, but that is the wrong thing to put on the barrier island, because we know they have a shallow root system and they topple over in a storm and they cause road erosion. So now when you drive into that park, you're struck with the native vegetation, which is mostly mangroves and sea grapes. And it was the same thing on Dania Beach Boulevard. Years ago, the whole boulevard was covered with these Australian pines, like a lot of roadways. State Road 84 was another one. And also Westlake Park, when the port and the airport were expanding, they had to do some wetland mitigation somewhere. So they went into Westlake Mangrove Preserve and got rid of all the non-native vegetation and actually planted new mangroves there. And then another example would be Key Biscayne. Prior to Andrew, they were loaded with all kinds of horrible non-native vegetation. And Andrew is so destructive that it literally leveled all the trees that were on the key. And they made a concerted effort going forward that they would only go native. So now when you drive on the key, it's all native vegetation. And I really think that's an important thing to do, because when you talk about water pollution and algae blooms and fertilizer runoff, everything that we put in the ground that's not native has to be watered, fertilized, fungicide, pesticides. And now with this thing going on in Biscayne Bay and the fish kills, and they're talking about the septic tanks and having a fertilizer ban, I don't know why we don't have a non-native tree ban That would solve the problem, and you wouldn't need all these fertilizers, and you wouldn't have to worry about the runoff. And if you look at any black and white photo of South Florida at the turn of the century, there was no coconuts, there was no royals, there was no hibiscus, and all this other stuff that was brought in. We really do need to get back to our native roots, so to speak, and we could solve a lot of problems.
So pun intended there?
No pun
Native
intended.
root? I like that. So no, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned about the Australian pines because they are non-native, and one of the problems with that is they keep maintain a monoculture because those needles cover the bottom below them, and nothing else can grow up through there. So that's a big point. And I actually had a client with a job site overlooking to Cape Florida State Park down there at the tip of Key Biscayne, and it was all covered with all these Australian pines. And after Andrew, everything is totally wiped out. So it was a good thing. It just takes a little time. And I agree with you. It was kind of nice driving in that long road into what was then John Lloyd, Mizell Johnson now, and have that shade. But it took a lot of work to take care of that. And there's ongoing work being done by many different people, removing scavola and other invasive species from the dunes. But we really need to recognize something as well, and I'm glad you brought this up, that over time, human beings, if we needed to move out from here, some people have the bank account, they could just move tomorrow, no big deal. Other may take a little bit more. But let's think in terms of the animals. Some animals are a little bit more mobile, like the birds, but other animals not so much. So what used to be tropical here in South Florida is now actually subtropical climate. So it's even more so a change. And what trees were native only in the Keys are now akin to what's appropriate to be planting here. So there's somewhat of a controversial move. Here's another little word to share. It's called assisted migration. Whether we should actually assist some of these plants to relocate further northwards, as would their normal progression be, because we don't have the luxury of time that we normally had as climate would change less rapidly to allow these things to move forward, get themselves established along with the animal life that would go along with it. So that's a couple of additional things there. But thanks for that thought, Clive. That's great. I'm sure we have some more. No one else want any final thought? All right. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I don't see if we have any other, was there any other question that came in on the chat or anything, Karen?
No, I don't see any.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate everybody coming here today. And I was hoping that our mayor was going to be on the call today. But
He did register, but I guess something must have come up.
okay, yeah, because I think just to alert you all, I think there's going to be a very positive announcement coming up at along with the Dune Master Plan, which I'm hoping to get approved at Wednesday's meeting. I think there's going to be something that talks about what's going on with Sunset Golf Course, and I believe you're going to see that that's going to be city property, going to turn into a wonderful spot for us.
Well, Karen, do you want to talk about our next
Yes,
meeting?
I do. Yes, I'd like to. Can you hear me? Can you? Okay. I just want to thank everybody for coming. Barry, that was just wonderful. I really appreciate you taking your time to inform us on what's going on. November 8th, our good friend Chris Mancini is going to have a lecture on with Joe Williams, who's a retired Broward County sheriff. It's going to be on the ghosts of sheriffs past. So that means, again, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So join us again on the 8th of November, and thank you again for coming. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Karen, could I offer a final comment? Because
Certainly.
look, there's a couple things that people may already have on their radar, but there was the extension of 836 in Miami that was going to call the Kendall Parkway, that was going to extend on out further into the glades for very little benefit other than for a handful of people. It's also going to encourage more sprawl with buildings going on out to the Everglades. So that's something I encourage people to oppose. There's also the M cores. M cores, sometimes referred to as the toll roads to nowhere. Jack, toll roads to nowhere. And what it is, it's going to be an effort to build new highways that are going to run all the way across Florida. And it's going to cut through a lot of native habitat, especially for the Florida panther and black bear, et cetera. Just logically thinking, if you're going to be developing an area, the first thing we should do is identify the areas that should be set aside for preservation. And then areas that are already built that we may want to build in a better fashion. And then those other things that fall in between may be able to have a negotiation. It's being touted as a way to get high-speed internet out into the rural areas. But in reality, it's just an excuse for some people to have a windfall, just like when they had the railroads going through in the old days out west. If you own that property where the railroad was coming, you were sitting pretty with your bank account. So I don't want to see this happening. And FYI, Nikki Freed, our Commissioner of Agriculture, has set up an advisory committee to advise her on a number of different issues. And in the conversations there, this has been brought up. And of all the comments about the MCORs, approximately 90%, even though this is not published by the state in terms of this information, but private entities, including 1,000 Friends of Florida, which is a wonderful group balanced on both sides of the aisle, that approximately 90% of the comments that came in regarding the MCORs were against the MCORs moving forward. This is going to add a huge tax burden over time. There's no reason for that. If we wanted to get high-speed internet out here to the reservation in the middle of nowhere, we don't need to build a road to get there. So that's a final thing I just wanted to have people to recognize. There's lots of different efforts that need to be made. Just like Marcos mentioned earlier, and Clive, there's just a shortage of people and time to make it happen. So let's get together, work together as groups, and be efficient with our own time. Because if we can avoid reinventing the wheel as we move forward and work together, just like we're doing here with the 4 southern counties, Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and Monroe, we can establish criteria, we can share the burdens, and come up with a better end result for everybody. So thank you all very much. Shona Bish.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, see you at our next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.